Hello and welcome to another Madaxeman podcast on the subject of the Guerre armies. This week we dive into deep depth on the Ghaznavids with a guest from the United States via Skype. Enjoy the podcast. Welcome to another Madaxeman podcast. I've got Ethan Zorick on the other end of the Skype line, all the way from the east coast of America. You're in the capital of the free world at the moment, Ethan.
That's true.
How does that feel? Do you feel literally in the capital of the free world, or has anything changed over the last few months that changes the way you feel about all that sort of stuff?
Oh, I don't know. Other than our orange leader, I don't think so.
Oh, right. Look, let's leave the orange leaders off and let's talk toy soldiers, because that's really what we're here for. So this is our second experimental Let's Talk About List Composition podcast. We've talked about the Ghaznavids with Richard Case, who's been doing very well in UK competitions with that particular list. And now we're going to talk about a very similar but a little bit different kind of list in the form of the Ghaznavids, which is list 193 in sort of the pale, funny blue section of the list book. And, you know, I guess it's probably even possible to make almost a literally identical Ghaznavid type list out of this if you really try, but it does sit in a different period of the army list, so it will be coming up against potentially in a themed competition different sorts of opponents. But and you've been using this in various competitions in the States, and I understand doing quite well with it. So, you know, looking at the list, you're starting with a commander +4. You've got planes, mountains, steppes. You can have a strategist. Maybe the whole general thing is the place to start. When you're looking at a list and choosing a list, how important? What are you looking for in terms of command structure? Is there a thing you're looking for, or how do you actually even start putting together a list from the commanders downwards?
So I think in ADLG, it's very important to have a vision of how you think this army works. I don't think you have to have high command ratings or a particular set of troops, but you have to have an idea of what this army is going to do. And so with Ghaznavids, which is can be a little bit like Sassanids, although I think used optimally, I think they're slightly different and perhaps have slightly different, kind of a strategy. But with Ghaznavids, the idea is that you want a mix of elephants with pretty good escorts, and we can talk about what that is, with lots of ghulams cavalry bow guys. And then what I've learned, originally I thought of this as more of a shooty cavalry army, and what it's as I played it more, what I realized is it's the elephants that really make it go. They're really the battle winners. Although you ignore the ghulams types at your own risk, because they play a really important supporting role. And so when I look at this list, what I've come to realize is that you want to think of the army as a delivery system for the elephants. And so the key is, how am I going to get my elephants and their escorts kind of in the right place, intact, which means ideally without getting shot at, so that they can deliver kind of the game-winning charge, because there's not a lot of things that can withstand kind of elite elephants hitting them, especially if you get to pick your spot.
Okay, but if we're looking at that from the command point perspective, I'm looking at that going 4 command points. Elephants are tricky; they need decent generals, otherwise they don't move. They need all the extra points to wheel around. So do you concentrate them in one command? Do you split them in 2? And what does that do for the command points for the other commands?
So for this army, and I think this is true for a lot of armies, because I'm going to take the strategist with this army, because I want to get my initiative up high. And as you in the list that I sent you, it's an initiative of 4, which is pretty high. Because what I want to do is I both want to deploy second, right, so that I can kind of pick my spot with the elephants, and I want to move first so that I can dictate the initiative. So what I do is I split the elephants up, and this is a little bit different than I do with Sassanids. And I'm going to give one of the elephants to the strategist, and that's actually going to be kind of, if you will, the better elephant bunch. He's going to get the Dailami as well, because that makes them relatively easy to control because they're not going to be impetuous. And then he's also going to get a whole wing of Turkish ghulams to support that. And so the idea there is our strategist, Mahmud the Conqueror, right, he's going to be a kind of a wing of the army, kind of all on his own. And because he's a strategist, he's going to have enough points to command all that. The important things to think about with this, the elephant is only ever going to be able to double move, right? So if you think about your command points, and really the key here is what are you going to do on the first move, right, is you're going to put Mahmud with the elephant and with the Dailami, and they're going to take basically no more than 2 pips because they can't more than double move anyway. And that's pretty much going to guarantee you at least 2 more pips for all of your cavalry and light cavalry to clear a path for the elephant.
Okay, and this is but you know, if you're saying this is sat on a wing, you've almost then committed your best elephant or your best elephant Death Star out of the 2 to one of the wings. Do you? Because is there something in that? Is that saying you want to put pressure on the wing and you're not really going to go down the middle against something with this army? You know, is this a can I or bust?
No. So you don't really want to do a can I or bust. What you want to do, and this again is why it's very helpful to attack, is you're going to pick one side or the other of the table, right? And so normally, Mahmud goes on one side. Then there's going to be another subgeneral who's basically just an elephant and his escorts, and another command that's just cavalry. And the idea is that you can write a deployment such that you can go either heavy on your left flank or heavy on your right flank, depending on where the opponent puts his troops. And so it's not going to be a can I. What you're going to do is you're going to try to collapse one flank of the enemy.
Okay, but if you've, because that's the bit I'm not quite following, so I'm trying to envisage this, because I can get the fact your strategist command, it's got cavalry, it's got elephants, that's effectively 2 commands, isn't it? But if you've got your cavalry are presumably going to be on the outside, then you've got your elephant. But how do you weight that army one wing or the other then? Because surely once that's in, it's in, and you're either stuffing elephants with no cavalry on an outside wing, which on the other flank, which sounds a bit crazy, or do you end up with the same deployment every game? You know, Ghulam command, smaller elephant command, then your strategist command with elephants and Ghulams. Is that it? And you're just concertinaing it up, or?
So probably 75% of the time, that's what you do. And the advantage of splitting the elephants up is that it makes the little elephant Death Stars, as you say, easier to command, because there's not one general trying to control all the elephants and the and their supports. Even though one of them is going to be even an ordinary elephant, he doesn't have very much to do, so he's going to have the pips to manage it. Okay. And we're going to make him included with his elephant, because that's the only important thing in that command, in fact, anyway.
Right.
And then normally one of your 2 cavalry wings winds up, mostly just skirmishing, and it's not going to be able to skirmish for very long.
Yeah.
But it's going to hold up the enemy for a turn or 2, which is because you moved first, and you're going to move decisively with your elephants, means the battle is going to be fought more where you want than where the enemy wants.
Got you. So effectively, you've got cavalry on both wings, and one of those wings is going to be half the table in some ways, and then the other wing's going to be squeezed up and going down the flank, and then you're kind of concertinaing both your elephants. You deploy second. So I'm guessing you stick the Ghulam only cavalry command out first. Most of the time, or most
of the time, that's what you're going to do.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So about 1/4 of the time, and this is why I think it's pretty useful to have the elephant only command, is that in fact you'll wind up putting probably that elephant only command actually out on the flank. And usually that happens when there's some unusual terrain on the flank, because the elephant and that elephant only command's got his Indian impetuous medium swordsman with him, and which is a fearsome, going through a brush or a field or something.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you look at it and go, yeah, I really want that there. And it's gonna plow through it. And then a lot of times when you do that, you want to hedge a little bit. And so it'll be on the outside of your strategist. And you'll deploy, or you'll be aware when you deploy in such a way that you might have to move some of the strategist cavalry, around or in front of that command to help cover that elephant's flank. And again, the strategist usually has enough pips to make that work.
Okay, but that sounds kind of a terrain thing, which if I'm kind of going back to the top of the list, if you've got rough terrain troops and you've got cavalry here, is this just an army for the plains, or because some of these armies counterintuitively, I've been using a lot of spearmen recently, and I think counterintuitively, I've found that a spear army doesn't actually want much terrain at all. It uses its natural width, but what's the natural home? What's your chosen kind of setup for this sort of army?
So the ideal here is that you're probably going to attack, and you're going to attack someone in the plains. Because in the plains there's relatively little terrain that the opponent can choose that's going to be a problem for the elephants. And if you're facing elephants, you want to choose all the rough going you can that the elephants don't like. And you're right, a spear army probably wouldn't want a lot of terrain. And it's very interesting because I fought spear armies with this. And so what you do, even if there's no terrain, it's not just a terrain army. Again, you're going to wind up concentrating all those Dailami, the Indian warriors, and the elephant on kind of one command of spear and just try to punch them apart.
Yeah.
And then you're through their flank, and the ghulams follow behind them, and then the spear army's basically in trouble.
Yeah, they roll them up. So actually, looking, we've the textbook big one. You've got ghulams, bit of light horse. You've got the elephant, Dailami, a textbook Death Star. You've got a couple of javelinmen to screen the elephant, give you a bit of extra rough terrain stuff. But in the other elephant command, there's some really interesting things. So an included general with an elephant. And then medium swordsman impetuous. And I'm looking at that. But that's a tricky bit of command and control there. Are you expecting this to die, Mr. Bond, as we say? Yeah.
So I mean, they're about the elephant general, which an elite elephant general is remarkably fearsome. And they're going to go, kind of right in the middle. They're almost never going to maneuver because they're going to be surrounded by cavalry and elephants, and you're going to have deployed second. So you're going to know where you're going to want to send them.
And you're charging this into literally anything. It almost doesn't matter.
It almost doesn't matter.
Is there anything that you think, maybe I'll drift it across and try and get out of the way, or?
So you don't, so the things you want to stay away from, so pike are a problem, because you can't get really any factor advantage against pikes. You also, would want to stay away from kind of, good non-spear heavy infantry, so like armored billmen, foot knights are a problem, and it's not so much that they're elephants ideally can take those on, but those things will kill the escorts. And then you get into a bad exchange ratio with an army that's not actually very big, and you have trouble then decisively breaking through.
Yeah, but I guess nobody's really got buckets of pike, unless other than those one or two complete wall of pike armies. Normally, it's difficult to fit more than even 4 or 5 into a list. Right. So I guess you can avoid those. But medium swordsman impetuous is, to me, it's kind of you want 4 of them sort of troop type, and then you can suffer some attrition. But I suppose if they're literally just going straight forward and the elephant in the middle is is tough
Yep.
against pretty much anything.
Yep.
Because I've seen the the Sassanid army used with the medium spearmen or other things to allow you to do cleverer stuff with. But I suppose looking at this, it looks very much like you're doing cleverer stuff with everything else, whilst the enemy's attention is focused on this list.
So it's interesting. So this is an interesting comparison, because that's actually what I think is the big weakness of the Sassanids. That the Sassanids are basically forced to take two mediocre medium spearmen, and that's in a lot of ways is the real difference, because those are considerably weaker troops than the impetuous medium swordsmen, even if they're a bit more maneuverable, because there's very little that they can decisively threaten on their own, even escorted by an elephant. And so then you're stuck with kind of these two weaker elephant escorts. And the Sassanids really only then have their own two Dailami as escorts. And so you look at that, and then in the Sassanid list, in my mind, that forces you, if you take two elephants, they've got to basically be in the same command, because you really want kind of those escorts for them. And so you have a single much more powerful elephant Death Star, but it's a narrower formation and it's a little bit weaker, because it's stuck with those mediocre medium spearmen. Now, it's not that you can't get good value out of those mediocre medium spearmen, but they're just much iffier if you need to get wider, or want to attack a wider formation.
No, that makes sense. And if we look at the other bits in the Ghaznavid list, which are not in this fairly straightforward force structure, there's still some interesting things in there. I think personally looking at it, I'm always toying with the idea of whether light cavalry impact, light cavalry javelin can bully the near compulsory two light horse that everybody else seems to have. And even just chucking in one or two of the impact cavalry, just to give you a little bit of an edge in theme against other people. That just gives it a surprise. If you were doing this perhaps in a two list competition, is that something you think there's a way of doing it, or is it just like there's not enough? If you're going to do that, take a different list.
No. So it's worth thinking about what the list that I sent you doesn't like, and what is what's possibly a little counterintuitive. What it really doesn't like is a much more focused light horse and cavalry bow army, because what those can do are two things that are very problematic for this list. So one, they can kind of overmatch a wing and defeat it fairly quickly, especially, so looking at, like, there's a command that's 3 heavy cavalry, a medium cavalry, and 2 light cavalry bow. So if you bring...
You've only got 1 elite cavalry in there, which... Right. I'm looking at them and looking at my Sassanid list and thinking, I'd just roll straight up to that. That would be...
Right. So if you can match up to that, pretty decisively, you can push that back at 4 MUs a turn, or force it into a fight it probably can't win. If you've got lots of light or cavalry with bows or other cavalry with bows, you can park them in front of the elephant formations. You'll shoot away those light infantry that are going to be screening the elephants, and then you can start shooting at the elephants and medium infantry, escorting them, and that's very dangerous for them. And the Ghaznavids can't push you fast enough into a melee combat with their elephants to really take advantage of those. So if you're in a 2-list tournament with Ghaznavids, what you want to do is I would almost certainly drop at least one of the elephants. And actually, the thing that I'd pick up to counter that worry about fighting another shooty cav army are the mixed heavy spearmen with archers.
Because that's like that's a really, for those to be heavy spearmen is quite an unusual troop type. It seems like it should be common, but particularly this late in the period, I think there's quite a few in the Byzantine list, but 3 here looks like a nice solid lump. Yeah.
So then you substitute that for sort of probably for one of your elephant Death Stars, if you will, and then suddenly that let's go and shoot at your kind of infantry or elephants in infantry suddenly looks a lot more dangerous when you have heavy spearmen with archers shooting back at you.
Yeah, that's a lot more tricky. Okay, so you're pushing people back with that. So it's okay. So this starts to make sense then. It's 2 Death Stars. You've got one which is just a sign of suicide missile. The other one is actually 2 commands. You're concertinaing it across the frontage as part of your deployment. And then there's almost a 2-list piece to this. So what you mentioned kind of pikes and other things. I guess it's the question: what has caused you trouble with this list? What are those games that you've lost or it's not worked out, other than some of the things that we've talked around, or is it just there?
So it's worries about that. You can also get overwhelmed in terrain by people again with even with like people with good heavy infantry or a mix of heavy and medium infantry can block you in terrain. The other one is a game that I won, although I probably shouldn't have, was against a Sumerian army, which was absolutely enormous.
Right.
And and in theory, I mean, like, I have an advantage against a lot of his. He had, a mix of mediocre and ordinary heavy spearmen, but there were an awful lot of them. And I looked at this, and really the only thing I could see to do was just try to crash through as fast as I could, which in the game turned out to work spectacularly as I annihilated his front line in about 2 rounds of combat with very good dice.
Right.
And at the same time, his Bedouin allies full of camels with bows was unreliable the entire game while I was dismantling the rest of his army.
Well, that sounds like a perfect strategy. Actually, I'll write that one down and try and remember it myself.
Yeah. So if you can arrange to have that happen, then it's all easy.
Okay.
But in theory, that was a very dangerous enemy because yes, I would expect I could beat up on all that heavy spearman. It could absorb enormous losses of heavy spearmen, and that those medium camels with bows were actually again that kind of threat to my skirmishing cavalry that was covering my flank. And not only that, if his ally had been reliable, they would have been supported by spearmen kind of also wheeling into my flank, and it would be very hard for me to slow that down significantly. And at the same time, it's unlikely I could have done enough damage to him frontally fast enough. As it turned out, the dice gods were very much in my favor in that game, and it worked out. But that's something that would be very difficult to deal with.
Okay,
similarly,
it's that width of spearman, then, yeah.
That width of spearman, or someone could come with a big width of like heavy swordsmen with 2-handed weapons. That would be a problem, or a big infantry army would be a problem. It's actually fairly hard to outflank people with cavalry purely in this game, and so if you have a big infantry army with enough kind of support from foot shooters, so that I can't just skirmish you and shoot apart your infantry, then that would also be difficult, just because it's hard to punch through those fast enough.
Okay. Well, you mentioned skirmishing. Actually, this is almost a broader tactical question, but with these commands that you've got here, they've got a lot of ordinary troops in. Do you see the evading, coming back? Is that a big part of the game? Because clearly there's an inherent risk in that. If you're shooting with mounted troops, you're within 2. If someone's charging you with mounted troops, they can get closer, or start to try and catch up with, or even move closer and then charge you. What's your rationale on when do I evade, I guess, or when do I stand and try and take him on?
So I'm pretty reluctant to evade from other cavalry because the danger is you'll just get caught on the evade roll, and then you're certain to be destroyed, basically. Yeah. The big advantage of evading, and this is one of the reasons I think the heavy cavalry with bow are really useful for this army, is that you can drive that heavy cavalry right up with your elephants against someone's, especially against an infantry enemy. Shoot at them a little bit, cover your elephants in your infantry's flank, perhaps even charge and break off. And then when they charge to try to drive you off, you can evade and then come back and put them back in a zone of control so they still can't flank your main line. They can bring in some troops behind, but that makes it take an extra couple of turns to turn the flank of your elephant line, at which time you hope they've broken through, and then you can start causing them problems another way. So the real advantage of the heavy cavalry bow is because they're armored, they're reasonably tough. Because they can shoot, they always have a little bit of combat potential, and they're pretty versatile in how you use them. And that's perhaps another kind of general way you have to think about when playing this army is you have to be pretty ruthless in terms of sacrificing troops to make your main attack work. If you have to leave your light infantry out to take all the shooting until they're dead, so that your main attack can get in. If you need to sacrifice a heavy cavalry to guard a flank, or to take away an overlap to let your main attack have its best chance, then that's what you need to do.
That must take some cojones with a 20 unit army as well. Just
oh yeah,
you got two Lightfoot, 3 Lightfoot, and a couple of cavalry. Suddenly it's a big old mess. But I think that lesson about getting the light infantry and being prepared for them to die is a really, really important one. I think I picked that up about a year and a half ago, trying to send in some sort of impact medium foot against Byzantine mixed shooting formations. And I think the first game I did it, I pulled the Lightfoot out, and then I took some hits, and then I just couldn't go through the spear, even the inferior. But letting 2 or 3 of those guys die and then charging through intact with your best troops makes such a massive difference to how that combat washes out.
Exactly. And so often, I mean, almost all my games, even when I win, you wind up with having taken, 12 to 16 attrition point losses in winning. And you have to keep an eye kind of on that clock and have a sense of, have I turned it so that I'm far enough ahead that even though, I'm taking losses, the damage I'm going to do is big enough. And sort of the way the game often works is there's a middle part of the game where you take a lot of hits kind of breaking through. And then the enemy just doesn't have anything else they can get at, right? There's all this heavy cavalry kind of swarming around, either generating attacks that they're very unlikely to lose on their own, or they're chasing them and they're running away.
Okay. So, all right. So actually then, just kind of recapping or maybe trying to recap it, what looks like on paper a textbook shooty cavalry army is actually a kind of 2-punch, 2 Death Star, throw it at anything army with support, and
right.
And I guess is that what catches people out there? It looks like one thing, it's expecting one thing, but it performs like a different one.
Yeah, so it's that to me is the main kind of mode, is exactly what you described. And then the other thing is the enemy still has to respect the fact that you've got like 8 cavalry with bows, and in this case 3 light cavalry with bows. And so if they deploy in a way that makes them vulnerable to that, then if you need to, you can hold back the elephants as just a threat to keep them from dispersing, to keep all the shooty cav off of them. And then just shoot them apart, and then pick a time, perhaps a little later, to execute that elephant charge, and break through. Okay. Right. So they still have to respect that you could, be a shooty cav army. Okay. Even though perhaps that's not your initial main inclination.
Right. So it's got quite a lot of different ways to play, even when it's been put on the table. It can still start off on one foot or the other.
Right.
Okay, interesting. And then I guess kind of the wrap up question is what kind of figures do you use for this one? Is this the get the generic Arabs ghulams out of the box, or is there an Ethan Zorick special Dailami Ghaznavid army?
No, so this is a whole bunch of generic Gilman and Turkish types that I've accumulated over the years. I actually, for the elephants, are the Essex Mogul Indian elephants, which are quite nice.
Yeah, that's good, because I think my I've got some Ghaznavids, and they actually are the Essex Ghaznavid army, which must Ghaznavid elephant, which must be some of the least inspiring elephants, with those three little guys and the diagonal pike being held, and elephants from before modern figures started having on it. And I hope, of course, that you've got the proper Essex Ghaznavid infantry that were in 7th edition. And they're all identically posed, but then suddenly they disappeared, and now everybody has to use them as Dailami.
Yeah.
That's the proper ones. Good. Excellent. Oh, excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks for that. We've skipped over talking about the Nafferton, but I'm guessing that's just because he's the third light infantry that you can have. And you can have 2 other light infantry bows, so there's nothing clever about him being.
No, there's nothing clever about him. So he's just with the he's the singleton, so that's why he's elite, to give him a little bit extra toughness, more than anything else.
Actually, I'm sorry, I'm just where does the upgrade to elite come from him? Am I missing that?
Oh, I don't know.
Maybe he chucks out an extra to soak up an extra point. But it doesn't look like he can be elite in the list. But we'll cut that bit out of the podcast and make sure you don't have to hand back hundreds of trophies. I think that's been really useful to talk through a list like that. And we will, obviously, thank you very much for spending the time.
Oh, of course.
Wherever you are, and we will no doubt do this again with another interesting list in the future. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Bye.